Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. I am your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe, and you can find us at Love Meets Literature.
You can find us on every corner of the internet, so please do give us a follow. It will help get our podcast out there. How's it going? It's kind of snowy outside. We're living in a snow globe right now. But how's it going otherwise?
Besides the snow, it's going well.
That is good.
How's it going for you?
Oh, it's going just fine and dandy over here. Very relaxing, snowy weekend, so that's always a good thing.
Yes, I agree. A perfect excuse to sit inside and read.
Yes, it is. And we will very much be getting into what we have recently read, what we're currently reading, because today's episode is just a chill little chat on those few things. So we each have some books that we want to share with you, what we're reading, what we want to read, what we recently read, all that fun stuff. But before we jump into that, I have a question for you, and you may hate me for asking this question.
I could never hate you.
That may be debatable. But my question is, if you could only read one book genre for the rest of your life, what would it be?
That is a difficult question.
I know, and I kind of hate myself for asking that question because I enjoy many genres. I feel like I read a good variety of things right now, and there's not really one genre that I like more than another. Like, yes, I have my preferences, but I do enjoy the variety.
Do we count like half genres? So, like, for example, if I picked fantasy, would I be allowed to read something that's classified as romance fantasy, or would it only be fantasy?
Well, yes, we can include subgenres in this. So, like,
Okay.
a romantic fantasy would be a subgenre of fantasy.
Or would it be a subgenre of romance? Or both?
Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky and the lines kind of blur. But I don't think that would be a subgenre of romance.
Gotcha. Despite the word romance coming first, it's a subgenre of fantasy.
You see, it gets tricky because romance has a lot of different variations. Like, there's contemporary romance, there's romantic comedies, there's dark romances, there's a lot. You could probably go on and on and on. There's historical romances, but I would categorize that more as a subgenre of historical fiction.
Let's pretend we're at a library
Okay.
and you have ACOTAR, because
Right.
that's like a well-known romantasy.
Mhm.
Where are you putting that? Under the fantasy section or the romance section?
It would go under the fantasy section.
Okay, then I would consider that fantasy.
Okay.
So I guess that's maybe a good analogy here is, what section of the library would you be confined to?
True. Although libraries don't sort their books by genre.
Well, for the sake of the question.
I guess your library would sort books by genre.
Probably, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, like, in my head, like sorting a library by genre. But that would be really hard, though, for like a real library, not like your personal library, because they just get so many books all the time. So then you would always be shuffling books around.
Well, yeah, that's true. I think that's why a lot of them do it by author.
Even my own personal library, I started sorting them by genre, but then I just kept accumulating so many that I kind of just gave up. And now I have a hodgepodge of books wherever they fit on the shelf.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. That's kind of what you have to do.
I know. We're getting kind of lost here. Back to the question. I know we're both avoiding answering this question.
I think my gut says fantasy. However, my brain, I kind of am leaning towards science fiction because I feel like you can do more with science fiction. There can be like more variety over time. Because I'm thinking like 20 years from now, if I'm still reading fantasy, it might be kind of one note depending on what's going on, as where science fiction can be like steampunk, it can be really futuristic, it can be just like a little blend of a flavor here and there. As where fantasy, I feel like most of the time you kind of have to have like magic and swords and usually different races and species and creatures. So it can get kind of one note to a degree. Right now, I really enjoy it. But again, 20 years from now, I might completely change my mind. So for the rest of my life, I think it would be science fiction.
Interesting choice. Not my choice, obviously. But okay. Valid points. I tend to read a lot of fantasy, romance, thrillers, historical fiction. Those are basically my genres of choice. They are in my Instagram profile, obviously. So, very different genres that I enjoy. So, I'm trying to think which genre would give me the most variety. So, if we start with romance, like, yes, there are dark romances, Regency romances, there are contemporary romances, which is like modern day. There's, I don't know, romantic comedies, which I really do enjoy. But when you really break it down, a lot of romance books kind of cover the same subjects. Like there's a lot of, only one beds, a lot of only second chances, a lot of forced proximities. There's a lot of enemies to lovers, a lot of friends to lovers, a lot of fake datings out there. And when you read a lot of romance books, they kind of all, now I know people are going to yell at me for this, but they all kind of start seeming like the same story.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which is why I usually space out reading romance books so I don't confuse one story from the other. Or I try to read different tropes if I read romance books back to back. Like, yes, every story is unique in its own way, but personally, I find that romance will not give me enough variety to only read it for the rest of my life.
Right.
So I'm going to nix romance. And then we got thrillers. You got your psychological thrillers, your paranormal thrillers. I would even put like horror into that category because you can have like a horror thriller kind of mix. Then you've got your mystery thrillers, your police procedurals, which I do love. I do love a murder mystery. Well, now I'm really contemplating thrillers. I wasn't before, but now I really am. Because sometimes, like, thrillers, too, they all kind of seem to be the same to me. But also, depending on what the twists and the reveals are, they can be really like, oh my god, edge of your seat kind of thing. And they can be really exciting.
Yeah, I could see that. The problem that I would have with thrillers, because that did kind of come up in my brain too, is that it would kind of be like, I always pull to Criminal Minds where like eventually you're just like consuming it for the sake of consuming it. You're like, oh, it was that guy again who clearly looks like he would be the bad guy. I just think it would become a little too predictable maybe.
That is a very good point because I also like to space out my thrillers so they don't all kind of start blending into each other. And I feel like if I just continuously read thrillers for the rest of my life, I would start to feel like I'm living in a Criminal Minds episode.
True. You would start maybe seeing it in like real life and you'd be like super paranoid all the time.
I would be suspicious of everybody and everything around me, I think. I don't think I would be able to trust anybody.
I agree.
Okay, I think I need to nix thrillers off the list.
So what do you got left?
Well, we have fantasy.
See, I keep going back and forth between that and science fiction.
I have read a lot of really good fantasy books lately. So I feel like me right now, if I didn't have fantasy books in my life, I have a lot of other options, but I also feel like I would be missing out on like great conversations around those books.
I guess that's true because they're like fantasy is really popular right now. So it's fun to read fantasy.
Right. And like it's fun to read about dragons and fairies and mythical creatures. So I don't know. But also like it's the same thing where like yes, I feel like all the fantasy books that I've read have had unique stories, but the genre is such a toss up for me in terms of like if I'm gonna like the books.
I think I want to change my answer back to fantasy.
You're gonna go back to fantasy?
I think I might. Because the more that I think about it, even though I just said that you have a lot with science fiction, I think hearing you talk about fantasy makes a lot more sense because if you do it right, there is a lot you can do with fantasy.
Well, it's called fantasy for a reason because you can make up anything.
Right.
Like you can make up like what your characters can do. The magic system, you can create something wildly different. Fantasy stories are just so unique.
That's true. And I also, my gripe was that a lot of them don't take place in modern day. So you use that or you lose that flexibility. But that's totally not true. I thought about it more. And like Percy Jackson is a modern day twist. The Dresden Files are a modern day twist. Like that's two right there that I both enjoy.
Yeah, you can have fantasies set in the modern world, urban fantasies.
Right. I totally forgot that category when I was deciding on this question or deciding on my answer, I should say.
This is a tricky question. I came up with the hardest question ever.
This is a hard question. I don't hate you, but I hate this question.
Well, and then we get to historical fiction for me. I do love a historical fiction, and there's a lot of different time periods that you can write about. I would learn a lot if I only read historical fiction for the rest of my life. Like, I've read historical fictions set in World War One, World War Two, the Civil War even. I've read Civil War historical fiction, which was the Sunflower Sisters. Great book, by the way. I just read that Cold War historical fiction kind of novel. I read a historical fiction novel about the opera singer Maria Callas. There's so much that you can do with historical fiction. I have a few on my shelf, like there's one about like Marilyn Monroe sitting on my shelf. I have the Romanov Brides on my shelf that I've read, which was about the Russians and the British royals. And that book was super interesting. I learned a lot from that.
I do think, though, that you are limited. You know what I mean?
Well, to some point, because some historical events are more well known than others. You can more easily write about like World War II because we know so much about it.
Right. But you also have to think for the rest of your life. So, you know.
But the thing is, history is being made every single day.
I guess that's true.
So 50 years from now, I'm hoping I'm still alive. I could read a historical fiction novel about, something that happened that I lived through.
That's true. I guess there's no rule against that. I wonder how long time has to pass before you can consider something historical fiction. Or if it happened in the past, it's instantly historical fiction.
I don't know what constitutes a historical fiction novel. I don't know how long ago it has to be.
Well, now I'm curious. I wonder if there's rules around that.
Well, what makes something vintage? Like, how old does it have to be considered vintage? 40 years? 50 years? Maybe it's less.
Most experts agree that an item is considered to be vintage if it's at least 50 years old.
Okay.
However, some argue anywhere between 20 and 100 years old. 20 and 99 years old. Anything more than 100 is an antique.
Well, because I've read historical fictions that take place in the 60s and the 70s. So that tracks because the 70s now is approaching 50 years.
Wow, your number you said earlier was right on the dot. It's generally considered that historical fiction has to be at least 50 years in the past.
Okay, so, there's always going to be something new.
It's not a hard set in stone, but it seems to be the general rule of thumb.
Well, I've read a lot of World War II historical fictions that take place in Paris, so I guess like the variety isn't huge, but also there could just be books in that genre that I haven't discovered yet.
Well, that's true. I mean, a lot of action happened in that area, so it makes sense. But I guess historical fiction will always have variety because there's like always a historical event. And as we discover more things, there's going to be more things to write about. I could just see you would be reading probably a lot about the wars.
This gets very tricky. I love all of these genres. So it's like, what do I choose for the rest of my life?
I think I'm officially locking in fantasy.
You can really do a lot with fantasy. But the thing is with fantasy for me, sometimes I want to read about like realistic things.
I think that's fair.
Do I want to live in a fantasy land for the rest of my life? Or do I want to read about historical events for the rest of my life?
It's funny because those things could not be more opposite than one another.
I think I might have to go with fantasy just because you can always have a variety.
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think I would get bored if I was limited to historical fiction. But some of my favorite authors are historical fiction writers. So not being able to read their books would really make me sad.
Yeah, that would be frustrating. I think it's the fact that we know that there's other genres and we can just do whatever we want. That's what makes this question so hard. But like if you were to never read and now you're picking it up and you were to only be locked into one genre, it'd probably be super easy to pick.
Probably. Okay, I think I would have to pick fantasy.
It's funny how we both came back around to the same conclusion.
I know. I'm trying to be logical about it. But my heart's like, I don't even know what, like historical fiction. And now I'm like going back to thrillers. I'm like, maybe I could read thrillers for the rest of my life.
Well, I think too, like one of the things that popped in my head is like, why do I read? And it's for fun and a little bit of like escape from reality. So if I were to be reading about current things or even in science fiction, there's a lot of like allegories to modern life. I think it would get a little bit, I don't feel like it would give me what I'm looking for. And so I think that's why I also came back around to fantasy.
Okay, I think my final answer will be fantasy. If I
All right.
could read one genre for the rest of my life, it would be fantasy.
Wow.
I know we both picked the same thing. How boring of us.
Well, see, I almost went with science fiction, but I had to stay true to myself. And also, in the spirit of the episode, I glanced at my up next books and they're all fantasy. So come on.
Okay, I guess fantasy is the clear winner here. Well, that was such an interesting discussion. I feel like I reflected a lot on the various genres that I read.
It was kind of a nice question for this time of year, you know? Got you thinking about the future reads and the past reads and all that kind of stuff.
It made me realize that like a lot of the romance books that I've read are like the same.
I am not. I think everyone knows that I'm not a fan of romance, and I'm actively trying to not be a romance hater. But when I see things online about it and people are excited about the same trope happening every single time in the book, I'm always like, why? And I get it to a degree, right? Like watching TV, like I was just talking about Criminal Minds, so I'm going to continue to use that. You always know that there's going to be a bad guy, and you always know that they're going to try and stop the bad guy. And there's often a lot of similarities between different things or tropes, if you will, like the arsonist, for example, or, you know, different types of bad guys in the show. So that makes sense. So when you read a book and you know you like something, you're going to go out and find other ones that are like it. But what gets me is like it's every single one that you read is like enemies to lovers. And it just seems like, wouldn't it get old after some time?
Well, the thing with a trope is that it's just like the trope. It's just the main theme of the book. And each author is going to have their own unique story surrounding that theme. So not every book with the same trope is like the same story. But for me personally, when I read a lot of romance books with the same trope, they all feel like the same story to me. But some people are just like, hey, that's what I like. I'm going to keep reading it. And like, I mean, okay, fine. Not my cup of tea. I prefer much more variety than that. I can see why they would like it because ultimately, like, every story is different.
Well, I guess that's true. I mean, I get that you're probably reading different authors. And so it might be enemies to lovers written by one person and then it's completely different written by another person. So I guess the more that I think about it, the more it makes sense. I could just see, like you mentioned, where if you're doing a whole bunch of them right in a row, it could kind of blend together and feel very samey between the two. or 3 or 4, however many you read.
Different authors have different writing styles too. So I've found myself binging one author's works because I love their writing style. So I guess that's also why I feel like some books seem kind of the same, because I mean, I do it to myself. I read multiple books by the same author in a row. And then of course it feels the same because it's the exact same writing style I'm reading for like 5 books.
I guess that's true. And the more that I think about it too, like, why would you read something that you know you're not going to like? You might as well just read the thing that you know you're going to like.
Yeah, and it makes reading fun. So yes, there's a lot of unique stories within all of the genres that we mentioned, but ultimately we just feel like fantasy will offer the most variety if we're stuck with it for the rest of our lives.
That's true. It's a long rest of our lives too. So
Yes, it is. So I guess that brings us into some of our latest reads. What did you just finish up? I think you just finished up Abe Lincoln.
yes, Honest Abe. I had set a goal of reading 1 book every 10 days, and so far I am successful. I read Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter by Seth Grahame-Smith. And when I gave you a teaser off of the podcast, I had rated this 4 stars. And after writing my review, which was also one of my goals, it's only 3 sentences, but still, I actually brought it down and I put it at 3.5 stars. And I'm usually not a half-star person, but 3 felt too harsh and 4 felt too forgiving. So I landed on 3.5.
So what changed between the middle of the book to the end?
Well, when I thought about it more, I realized that there was some parts in the book that just weren't needed at all, which could have cleaned it up and made it feel a little bit better. And then there was also some problems that I had with the hook, which was vampires, that were kind of silly and just not needed. So the premise of the book is following Abraham Lincoln in his life from basically birth to death. The best parts of the story are talking about Abe and what he goes through in his life. And if you take out the vampires, it's actually a really good kind of biography of his life, at least from what I understand of his life.
Did they include John Wilkes Booth?
Yes, and he was a vampire.
You
Spoilers.
see, I was going to ask you, was John Wilkes Booth the vampire?
So I'm going to give you a lot of spoilers for this. So if you want to read this book, I suggest skipping this. But unsurprisingly, there's vampires in the story. And the whole premise is Abe grows up, or as he's growing up, he gets his first encounters with vampires. And he decides that he's going to destroy all of them. And that's like his life goal now. And then he gets help from another vampire against his wishes. Like, he didn't want to because he wants to destroy all vampires. He realizes that he has to kind of team up with this guy in a sense, and they spend their lives hunting vampires. Abe gets taken around to all these different places in his journey to Illinois and his journeys to like New Orleans and all this kind of stuff. And what you learn is that in the South, the slave owners are vampires, or they're being backed by vampires. And sort of the whole premise is that way back in like the 1400s, vampires were all over England and Europe and all of those different countries. And then they started to get found out and they started to get hunted by the European vampire hunters. And so then what happened is they decided to move to the Americas because they knew they wouldn't get hunted there because there was nothing there. And so when they did that, they also realized this would be a great opportunity to start slave trades so that way they could feed on people for free. And so essentially that's the gimmick there, or the hook, if you will, is the vampires orchestrated slavery.
Interesting concept. So how does Abe slay the vampires?
So through his life, he's affected by vampires. So again, major spoilers. His mother is killed by a vampire,
Oh.
which is what makes him say, I'm going to, destroy all vampires. And the parts of the story that I love are his journal entries where he talks about his grief and his sadness through losing different family members and his mother. And it's very like raw and real. And that's the part that you really kind of fall in love with Abe, and you feel the character and the person and the passion. And those are why I loved the book. And then he starts his career vampire hunting. He meets Henry, who then helps him, who's the vampire, the other good vampire, if you will. And throughout this time, they're hunting. And then eventually he starts to run for Congress. And I'm skipping a lot of the interim parts because it's really just him hunting, and his stories about how he gets better at hunting and all these kinds of things. And so then he goes out and actually, slays these vampires himself with his axe. And eventually he goes to Congress, and the vampire community is split. There's the good vampires, so to speak, which eventually become the Union, and there's the bad vampires, so to speak, that are wanting to keep slaves, and they become the Confederacy. And so that's where the split is. And so again, it takes the whole Civil War, and rather than it being necessarily about slavery, which it is, they add this extra little hook of vampires being the ones kind of orchestrating it. And so then he goes on to free the slaves, which then sort of cripples the vampires, because now they are getting rebellions by their slaves and all these kinds of things, and it just causes problems. And well, you know how the Civil War ends. So
Did Abe slay John Wilkes Booth, or did vampire John Wilkes Booth end up still killing Abe?
So he still kills Abe.
Oh, okay.
And this is the worst part of the book, which is the ending. And as I've mentioned before, the ending of your book means everything to me. And the ending of this book was really silly, which is why I didn't like it. And what it is Abe is assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth is a vampire, so it fits the theming entirely. And so that part all makes sense. What doesn't make any sense is that at the very end, it implies that Henry, the vampire, brought Abraham Lincoln back to life as a vampire, and then they were watching Martin Luther King Jr. give his speech in front of everybody to continue the battle against, racism and things like that.
So vampire Abe Lincoln is now immortal?
Yes. And the thing that he swore to destroy, and that even to the very end of his life he hated more than anything, he is now one of those, which I thought was ridiculous.
But was he turned into like a vampire for good? Like, does he want to be like a good vampire?
Well, he is. So in theory, what it is Henry Sturgis is this good vampire, so to speak. And he's the one that is trying to make slavery end and all these different things. And he wants people to be free, is his whole thing. And so throughout the story, he talks to Abe and he saves him multiple times because he keeps saying that Abe is just too interesting of a man to die or to let die. And even when Abe loses his sons and things like that, Henry offers, I can bring them back to life, but they would be an immortal vampire. And so Abe doesn't want to do that because he resents vampires and he hates vampires. And so at the end, for him to turn into one just seemed so strange to me. Like, Abe talks throughout the book of like his value of life and how all of these different things happen, and he battles with like depression around these things and these really heavy topics. And for it to kind of be like a little bit of a gimmicky ending like that, I thought was silly, and it kind of undermined the tone of the book, which is why this ended up being 3.5 for me. Now, if you're really leaning into the fantasy element of the book, I think it is kind of a fun ending, and you can take that what you will. It does turn Abraham Lincoln into like a Bigfoot kind of cryptid, he's out there. Like that's the implication. But I don't know. That's just me.
That seems wild.
The book itself, though, everything up until that point, and again, like the stories of when he loses his mom and he loses his son, multiple sons actually, and then he also loses like his first love and the writings about his first love. It's really good. All those parts are incredible, and you really, again, you fall in love with Abe and his cause and his purpose, and you really see this window into his depression and angst and anger with his family and his dad, and it's really good. Those parts are incredible. And I almost kind of wish this was just like no vampires involved and it was just a biography, because that would be incredible and really, really good. But that's why it ultimately ended up getting 3.5 stars for me.
I think that's a fair rating.
Yeah. Not quite 3, not quite 4. But again, that was Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter by Seth Grahame-Smith.
Well, I just finished Iron Flame.
And how was it?
It was surprisingly actually pretty good. Like, I had kept seeing pretty average reviews for it. A lot of people that I follow on Instagram gave it about 3-4 stars. So I was a bit skeptical going into it. And it's the reason why I put it off for so long, because that book came out at the end of 2023. So I've had it for a while now. Just didn't bother picking it up because I didn't want to read like some mid book. But I was very pleasantly surprised by it. And I ended up staying up super late one night to finish it. And it was very much worth it. And I'm not going to spoil anything for Iron Flame because I know a lot of people are reading it either for the first time or they're doing rereads of it in preparation for the newest book, which comes out this month, called Onyx Storm. So we will keep this spoiler free for the moment. There was a lot of action in this book, a lot of action adventure-y parts, a lot of violence, like a lot of people beating other people up, all that kind of stuff. A lot of war and politics talk in this book, which is all super interesting when you're considering that it's a war college. Like, these are students at a war college. They are learning how to, I don't know, like be a rider is what they call them. They're dragon riders. So they're learning how to fight in combat and whatever on the backs of their dragons. But there's also like different parts of the war college too. Like there's scribes and there's infantry members. So they all like will play a part in a potential war. So this war college is their students there. And this book did have a lot of like unnecessary parts to the big thing that happens at the end. So I feel like it definitely could have been a lot shorter, because there were some things where I thought it was going to go in one direction and then it went another, and it was kind of like anticlimactic. But the big thing at the end was very shocking to me. And I was like, oh my God, what did I just read? So there's that for you. And of course, the dragons were much more present in this book, I feel like, than Fourth Wing. So that was nice to see. I always like when the dragons are there, because the dragons are kind of like, there's sometimes that comedic relief, because like the main characters will talk to their dragons and their dragons might have some like quip to say back to them.
Oh,
so,
the dragons can talk?
Yeah, the writers can talk to their dragons.
Like actually talk? It's not like, you talk to like a dog or a cat.
No, like the dragons won't say like words out loud, but they can like talk through this bond like in their minds.
Oh, so it's telepathic.
Kind of. Yeah, that's how I would describe it for people who have never read a fantasy novel. Because like, you know how in ACOTAR, Rhys and Feyre are, did you get there yet?
I know about it, but I haven't read that.
Well, at the end of ACOTAR, she's tattooed, right?
Oh, well, yeah.
They can talk to each other down that bond.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, well.
I mean, it's implied really heavily, but
I don't think that's really a spoiler, considering you're going into the next book anyway. But it's kind of like that. Like the writers and the dragons can like talk down this bond to each other.
Right.
So when the characters are talking to their dragons, like it's kind of funny because then the dragons will like say something like, "Oh, you're so dumb," like whatever, like that. So it's funny. And I like the dragons. The dragons are my favorite characters in these books, which is why I keep reading them. I also feel like our main characters had a lot of character growth in this book. I mean, obviously they did annoy me sometimes, but what are you going to do about that? So there's that. And then there was like another super shocking thing, which had me like, what? It was a really thrilling book. It surprised me in a lot of ways. It was really addictive. Like, I don't know what Rebecca Yarros does to these books, but I could not put it down. I only gave it 4.5 stars out of 5. It lost half a star because I did feel like some of the things were very irrelevant to the ending. But I'm very much looking forward to Onyx Storm. I feel like this book set up the next book perfectly.
Why do you feel like it was or other people were giving it 3 to 4?
Well, without spoiling anything, there is someone who comes back that was very hated in the first book. I don't know. It was just very long. It felt really tedious at points. Like some of the class scenes that the main character was going through. Like I didn't always need to see her sitting in class. I mean, people might have not liked that the romance wasn't super heavy in this one. Like our male main character, Xaden, he was not as heavily present in this book as he was in Fourth Wing. However, I think Onyx Storm, he's going to have much more of a presence. So this was kind of like a transition book per se. It was really long for a transition book, which is why I think most people are kind of like, what? Like, what was this? It was like big old nothing happening until the last 100 pages. So I mean, it did have important things in it that I think are going to be important to the next book. It just wasn't important to this book.
Gotcha.
So that's my 2 cents. I mean, I liked it. When I finished it, I was like, what on earth did I just read? Because the ending was truly crazy. It felt out of left field to me, but at the same time, it was the most massive cliffhanger ever. So I'm very glad I read it now, closer to when Onyx Storm comes out, because now I don't have to wait super long to find out what happens.
That's good. That's like back in the day when you'd watch, a season of a show and then they're like, oh yeah, the season's not going to come out for like 2 years.
I know. I'd be like, I'm going to forget everything that happens.
Yeah.
So Iron Flame was a 4.5 star read for me. Very good. I think it's worth the read, and I think people will enjoy it. I know there's people out there who did not like it. However, respectfully, I think they're wrong. So that's what we have read recently. Now, currently, I'm trying to work my way through an arc in advanced copy of Babylonia by Costanza Casati. I've not read any other books by this author, so I had no idea what to expect with Babylonia. But from what I'm getting so far, this takes place in ancient Assyria. And it's kind of supposed to be like the Mesopotamia era. So it's like kind of big brainy for me with like everything they're explaining. Because learning about Mesopotamia in school was never my favorite thing. Like dirt and dust and clay is not my vibe. I don't particularly enjoy reading books like that, like books set in a desert land. I usually don't pick up because I don't enjoy the dusty, sandy setting. Now, this is Mesopotamia era, so things are not very built up just yet. They're working on it. It's the start of civilization. They're getting there. And there's rivers and stuff and like grass still. But from what I have read so far, our main character is like getting all muddy and dirty, like doing things. And I'm like, I don't know about this. So I'm very much still feeling out this book. But on Goodreads, it has a very high rating. It has over a 4-star overall. A lot of people have given it 5 stars. So I'm like, maybe I just need to like get past this beginning 20% and see how it goes.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of hard to say because I haven't read it, but if there's that many good reviews, I feel like it's at least worth, like you said, getting, 20% or more of the way through to see if it picks up.
Right. And like, I think this story is supposed to be kind of like a retelling of the fall of the Assyrian Empire in ancient Assyria. And I think it's supposed to be a retelling where after the king's fall, because the very first sentence of the synopsis is kings fall, queens rise. So maybe they get like a queen, and maybe it's like woman empowerment kind of thing. So I'll see how this goes. I'm not always a fan of an ancient setting, but this arc was gifted to me by the publisher. So I figured I'm going to give it a fair shot. If I'm not vibing with it by like 30%, maybe even 25%, it might have to be like a either DNF for now or this book is just not for me.
I think that's fair.
So I'm trying to figure out which book I'm going to read at the same time as I'm reading this because, my brain is mush. It is tired. I don't really want to try and work my way through a big brainy book when I don't have the brain power to do so. So I might try like a light little romance thing. Maybe I'll search Kindle Unlimited, find one, knock it out. I haven't finished a book in days because I've been working on Iron Flame. Iron Flame took up 5 days of reading for me because it was so big and the font was so tiny. So it took me even longer to read it than usual. So that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at with my current reads.
Well, I technically have not opened the book yet, but my current read is The Witcher #7, The Lady of the Lake. It is the second to last Witcher book, which is Season of the Storms is supposed to be the last one. And this one's kind of long. It's compared to at least the other ones. It's 560 pages according to Storygraph. I'm assuming mine is probably the standard copy. So we'll see. But the goal is to read that within the next 10 days.
Well, I think you can do it if you read like 50, 60 pages a day.
Yeah. And The Witcher, the last one roped me in by the end. So if anything, I could probably get it done even sooner. But that's going to be my current read.
How exciting.
And then after that, I have on my up next, I will finally go back to A Court of Mist and Fury.
You should. It's really good.
It's on my up next. I've been using that on Storygraph. I actually have a nice little list here. What are you planning to read through the rest of January?
Well, I recently got Four Ruined Realms by May Corland in the mail. I pre-ordered it because I really liked Five Broken Blades, and they're pretty books. They have pretty sprayed edges with a picture on them, and they look nice on my shelf. Basically, these books are kind of like a heist-oriented fantasy, so they're super interesting. Like, I even think you would like them because through Five Broken Blades, they were kind of planning this heist, and it was very interesting, and it kind of had this found family aspect to it too, and the cast of characters were all very different, very diverse set of personalities and people, and it made for an entertaining read because their own personalities, they meshed very well, even though they were very different. And I liked that because then I could kind of tell whose point of view I was reading without knowing whose point of view I was reading, which I like. I like when the personalities are so distinct like that. So I'm very excited to read the sequel, which is Four Ruined Realms. And I heard this is going to be a trilogy, so there will be another book after it too. So very much looking forward to getting to that. I hope I actually do get to it this month. January is going by kind of fast so far, so we'll see. I also want to continue the Lark Cove series by Devney Perry, which, thinking about it, I might actually pick that up today because I want to get away from my big brainy Babylonia book. And this next book is Tragic. That's the title of the book. The book itself is not tragic. Well, I don't know. I haven't read it. We'll find out. But the Lark Cove series it's really cute. It takes place in a small Montana town, and small town romances are just like nice and cozy, and they're easy reads. And these books have kind of like this drama to them that's super interesting. I don't really remember what happened in the first two books. It's been a while since I read them, but this is one of the series that I want to finish this year. So we're going to get there. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it by reading this book. And then I have a couple more arcs on my NetGalley shelf that published this month that I should get to. Should being the keyword. I'm not going to say I will get to them because, like I said, January is flying by and time is slowly running out or quickly running out, however you want to put it, to read what I want to read. Iron Flame did throw me for a loop with how long it took me to read. So I'm a little off track. My Storygraph goal says I'm one book behind schedule, so I need to rectify that.
I think you'll be all right.
I really hope so. I did make my goal higher this year, but I didn't allot for the longer length books, which take more time to read. I didn't really read any huge books last year.
That's fair. I guess you'll just have to make more time this year.
I may have screwed myself over with that. Or maybe I'll just, push all the long books aside and say, see you next year. No, I will make more time. I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. I haven't missed my reading goal in a couple years now. So if I miss it this year, who cares? It's just a number. But also, I made it higher this year. Usually I just keep it lower. And now if I actually make it higher and I don't meet it, I'm going to be really mad.
We will just have to spend more weekends reading.
I'm going to have to stop watching 90 Day Fiancé.
Oh, so tragic. Well, I've got Lady of the Lake as my current.
Right.
ACOMAF as my next one.
Why do you say it like that?
It's my favorite acronym. A Court of Mist and Fury. And then after that, I will have... Actually, those technically should take me both through the end of January. But if I can squeeze it in, I'm also going to try to squeeze in A Little Hatred. These are all books that I've talked about and I just haven't gotten to yet. And so I'm trying to prioritize them. A Little Hatred is the next trilogy, I believe it is, after the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie.
So is it the Second Law trilogy?
Funny.
Probably not.
Hilarious.
But I make jokes.
You should email him and be like, hey, you should have called it this. It's called The Age of Madness, but I'm not sure. I can't remember if it is a trilogy. Oh, and they kept the same theming too. I like that. And then to end it off, I haven't decided yet if it's going to be The Last Witcher. I would have to get the book first because I don't own it. Or if I'm going to go back to the Dresden Files and finally read Grave Peril. Those are the ones that I have on my up next on my Storygraph. I was thinking about going back to the Dresden Files because those are fast-paced reads and there's like a lot of action usually. And so I really like those. And plus I just haven't read them in a while. And I've been eyeballing the one that I have on my shelf just reminding me about it. So I might go back to those.
Well, that could be fun.
If it's not one of those, it would be the Victor the Assassin series. And I might do that because I know I can get it on Kindle and I want to try to use my electronics more this year. And that's also a fast-paced action book. So
having the goal of using your electronics more just seems so convoluted to me.
I mean, it's more so use my Kindle more because I only read like 2 books or something like that off my Kindle all of last year. Or no, 3 books.
Okay.
So I want to try to use, that more.
Sounds good.
But that's what I've got up for January and probably a slight taste into February, depending on how quickly I read.
Well, we've got quite the lineup. And I'm just hoping that these minutes start going by slower so I can catch up on what I've got to read.
Yeah, we're going to need it because we've got a lot of things lined up. But it's a great start to the year.
It is. I need to stop scrolling and I need to start reading.
True. Yes. I need to start putting my phone in the other room for sure.
I did that when I was trying to power through Iron Flame and it helped so much. Out of sight, out of mind. I totally forgot about my phone. I didn't have the urge to reach for it. Or if I did, I was like, oh, it's all the way in the other room. I don't want to go get it.
It's a good point.
Yeah. And it worked. So enough book chatter for the day. What are you currently obsessed with?
I know we just talked about getting off our phones, but I think I would have to say that I've been obsessed with a phone game and it's called AFK Journey. And it's just like one of those rot your brain kind of idle games where you're just like doing whatever. What I really like about this one though is that it has like an actual story and the story is good and it's fun and interesting and the characters are interesting. And so, as we're normally with these phone games, it's like you just skip everything and it's all annoying. This one, you can tell that there was like a lot of love put into writing it and creating it. And so that part's been enjoyable and I like it. The art's really good and it's just been fun. It's one of the things that I use rather than scrolling social media because I have the tendency to just pull out my phone and go to Instagram or something. And so instead, I go to this game and I like check one or two things and then I close it rather than scrolling for 25 minutes or something like that, doing nothing productive. So it's like a step in the right direction.
Well, that's good. I usually just play Candy Crush when I play games on my phone.
Yeah, or Words with Friends.
Words with Friends. Yeah, I do really like Words with Friends. You need to take your turn, by the way.
Yeah, I know. I got a message for it.
Well, I mean, I would say obviously still obsessed with checking on my Sims twice a day. I need to make sure they're doing good. I need to make sure they don't get like too low with any of their things. They got to get adequate sleep and they have to go to work. So then we have enough money to build more buildings and build more houses and buy nice things. So that's what I'm trying to do. I did not check on them yet today, so I got to do that. But I'm trying to not be on screens as much. It's a problem. I would say ultimately now that I am obsessed with the winter mountain fireplace, I found a new fireplace. It's not Christmas. It's just a little like bonfire in the middle of some snow with mountains in the background. I love it.
Yeah, we've traded out the Christmas one for like alpine, snowy mountain fireplace with the crackling.
Yeah, I forget its actual legal name, but
Yeah, I don't remember.
It's like cozy alpine fireplace with winter mountain setting and crackling noises or something like that.
It's like an Amazon item description. Tells you every little component inside of it.
Hey, for that search engine optimization.
I guess so. They know what they're doing.
They do know what they're doing. So yeah, I'm obsessed with that and like ambient lighting still, just getting like the cozy vibe so I can read with no distractions.
That's fair.
But I still have to check on my Sims twice a day.
With the fireplace in the background still.
Yes, exactly. You know me so well.
It's a whole vibe.
But I also did start playing Dreamlight Valley again. I haven't played it in a couple days now, but I'm trying to progress on my quest, which I've made literally zero progress in the last 2 days that I've been playing because I still have to up friendship scores, and it just takes a really long time.
I do find it funny whenever you play Dreamlight Valley, though, because if I'm on my computer, I get the notification pop-ups of you getting achievements. And so it just cracks me up every single time.
I know. I think I recently got like an expanding my house achievement because I paid to make my house bigger.
And it popped up on my computer and I was like, what in the world was that noise? And I see like the little pop-up saying, you expanded your house to the maximum or whatever. And I was like, oh, nice job, me.
So yeah, Dreamlight Valley, I'm trying to get back into that. And I mean, it's been fun. It is a fun game. Like I do like it. It's just very tedious with this one quest so far.
That's fair. Sometimes it happens.
It does. And then I get lazy and I don't have the time to sit for like 5 hours a night and try and finish this quest. It's just very time consuming. But anyways, this was another fantastic episode. We have some great reads coming up. We recently read some awesome books. We hope you take some of these book recommendations and read them. It always makes us happy. And I guess we'll be reading fantasy books for the rest of our lives.
I guess so.
But that's fine with me. So go cozy up with a good book. Stay warm outside. It did get a little snowy out there. So good day to stay in and read. And as always, happy reading.